Hey,
Hello, how are you?
I am doing fantastic. It is actually so good to get a chance to hear you and to see you. You're missing something really important, like your right hand.
The robot arm.
Yes.
Yeah, I know. So I have a whole separate workbench that I put together. It was it took a couple of weekends. We found it it's like a standing workstation that if you were in like a manufacturing facility, you would have. So it's got this beautiful power grid on the front and then shelves for all the junk. So that's where I've been doing all my projects lately.
Nice. Well, and I wanted to thank you for, taking the time to share your insights and things with us. It'll be likely you and I today. Tushar
Perfect.
is going to do something this evening, and he has left you and I to have a beautiful conversation.
I think we're gonna have a blast.
We are going to have a blast. And that actually brings me to, I think, some questions that I wanted
Sure.
to start off with is, you have had a career that's kind of spanned, speaking of bench, right? You've done a lot of the hands-on work at the technical side, and you've evolved into taking on roles of like higher level leadership and eventually kind of leading, kind of technology solutions, particularly AI, for some, large organizations. So, like, how did it kind of your path in this journey?
Yeah,
So share about your journey.
absolutely.
Kind of give some, it's kind of it's intriguing and it's actually kind of cool.
I think it also says a lot about sometimes setting aside the things that you had set in stone. Like you have your vision, and then there's like the actual path that it takes to get there, and how sometimes it's not quite what you had drawn out for yourself. But as long as you follow the same spirit and intent of what you were trying to achieve, you'll get there. Going back to my high school days, I wanted to help use technology to, I don't know, intervene in healthcare scenarios. I had been very inspired by a video I saw of cochlear implants about this idea that if someone needs additional assistance, we can take advantage of how technology is changing and try and bridge some gap, um, address a need.
Mhm.
And I was only my it was my senior year in high school, and no one had suggested engineering. They were like, well, you could be a neuroscientist, you could study neurology. So if you look, my applications were all over the board, and I did end up at an engineering school, and I changed majors a couple times and found my way into my first clinical role by being a patient at that hospital. It was a good one. It was a reminder to always ask questions. And so through it, that was where I started to see the devices being used in a real population and understood the nuances of, okay, there's the scenarios that we write, when we write our specifications, when we think
Mhm.
we're going to create something. But then there's how things happen at midnight in the hospital when something is not planned. I brought a lot of that back because I was doing that alongside my schoolwork. And I became a little bit disillusioned that I was learning a ton of theory but not a ton of application. Um, so I ended up running through a master's in technology and engineering innovation management. And that gave me that higher order understanding of how do we make things, but also care about cost. How
Mhm.
do we think about cycle time?
Mhm.
So I remember distinctly we ran a lab and then we ran it again, but sort of introduced this idea that every widget that you put into this, it was a logic gate. Every logic gate you put in, there might be a delay associated with that. So now how would you redesign your solution? And suddenly people attacked the problems very differently. And so that was my first mindset that I didn't just want to design individual circuits, but I wanted to think about bigger picture things. Um, I brought that passion with me into the world of software. I did a bunch of things in devices, primarily around aftermarket equipment, so PET CT injector, as well as repairs of MR coils. But I really liked being closer to the impact. So somewhere between a professional and a clinical setting. And what I learned though is, again, this idea of like trying to help people with the technology and see if we can bridge the gap in healthcare. What moves really fast is software. And that's, I think, what brought me to the world of AI and machine learning.
Yeah. So when you take all of that experience and you roll it up, how has that actually shaped the way that you view the, AI and kind of the whole transformative work? Because I would imagine it becomes a lens for how you see things, whereas some of us not having that experience would not see things that way.
So the key is this: I have failed in every way possible. I have failed in hardware, I have failed in software, I have failed in systems integration, I have failed in deployment into the real world. And I think it's those collective experiences that makes me a little more intentional in the way we use AI. I've seen, so one of the devices that I worked on, it worked great in the lab. But after repeated use in the real world, we found that it started to create a noise, like a squeaking. And so the device only started to break down after thousands of runs. It started to squeak. And we paid no mind to it because as we were developing it, as we were evaluating it, we never hit that amount of cycles to hit that failure. And so now I think about this idea of sending it to the extreme and pushing a project to the limits. When we're building software, we ask, if I took this to the extreme, how might this fail? And I ask these kinds of questions because of the failures that I've seen in real world applications. When my team sees that something has a lot of usage or repeat usage during the day, I start to ask myself, could that be representative of a problem instead of a desired outcome? Everyone wants to build something that feels useful, that brings people back. But if your intention is productivity, ideally, you've built something that someone does their job very quickly, they get out and they leave. And so if they're coming back over and over again, you've introduced new abrasion, you've invited people into your tool that maybe wasn't part of their everyday work. And now they're pulling things in, they're pulling things out, and you've created the squeak, as it were. So I think it's just making sure that with each of these stops along our careers, being very introspective about the things that we learned, the things that we experienced, and knowing that we can reapply them in vastly different circumstances. I'm not in a lab repeat stress testing a medical device, but that same problem of repeat use and maximizing how it works, that's something we can all use in our everyday work.
Mm-hmm. And so taking that experience and, I, of course, like to reframe it as not so much as failures, because you really do get experience to learn what works and what doesn't work, right? And in a time where I think much of this was newer, you were putting
Yes.
things to the test that were really, you were on the front end of testing a lot of things. And it's not like there was a playbook that actually said this is a known failure, right? You were discovering. So for me, I kind of frame it as on a path of discovery, you learn what works and doesn't work. And it's so cool that you take all of those insights forward. And so as you kind of look at how people apply some of these things, there's the concept of folks approaches saying, we need this. And it's going to solve this problem and thinking technology is going to solve the problem. So how has all of these collective experiences also shaped the way that you look at something when someone comes up to you and says, Corrine, I got this great idea. We're going to fix the world and here's what I want to do and here's my solution. Like, is that really what people need versus what the industry assumes that people need?
You're asking the multi-billion-dollar question that product managers ask themselves every day, which is, if I hear a need, is that truly what I am solving for? Or is that almost a symptom? And so my experience is that I like to go into a therapy type mindset. And I just sort of invite more conversation. All right, tell me more about the problem. Tell me why you think this is the thing worth solving. And I sort of get some of that information. And sometimes the conversation takes us in a very different direction. Sometimes the solution is not the technology. We often look at our problem space in terms of people, process, and technology. And I love when the solution is not a technology solution. It may just be, hey, there needs to be a stronger trust relationship between these two teams, and they delegate one workflow from one team to another. And now we don't have to change the whole program. We don't have to introduce a new piece of software. We've just changed interactions between two teams. I also tend to look for patterns. So if someone asks me for something, there's always the thing. There's the, I think this is the solution, and people want to run towards a solution, but I also want to understand the problem they're running away from. And then I want to ask, are there other people who have similar problems? And those problems can oftentimes manifest if you strip away any of the special terms of art that one person or team might use. So if you take a step back, you might say, well, this is actually a queuing problem. I see that teams A, B, and C, and it could be your accounts payable team, your case management team, and your complaints team, all receive cases or requests. They put them into a work log, they have to triage them out to people, and then they have to determine the turnaround time for those responses. That is the same pattern on three very different teams. But if you had been brought that request, we need an AP invoicing or invoice management system, you would have solved for that problem. But you have to be able to abstract away what someone might bring you that feels like you can really solve it, but you have to slow it down a little bit and like kind of look at the bigger picture of what is needed versus what is requested. It is a very hard dance that you have to dance with your partners in problem solving because they don't want to see it as a queuing problem. They see it as a case management problem. They see it as a complaints management problem.
Mm-hmm. So out of all these projects that you see, what separates ones that are successful to scale versus the ones that, never make it past a pilot?
A great question. I think this is also the challenge of technology that allows you to do anything and everything. When you can build anything, and ostensibly you can right now, you can build a robot arm in your basement if you want to,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. I'm following you on I'm living vicariously through
Yeah.
through your workbench.
So it's this judgment of, and I've heard the word that's being used by the tech companies is taste. And I don't love that because that represents it's art. But I think very practically, it's not much different from the way we were doing standard technology rollouts before. You have to try and quantify your impact. There was this obsession in the early days of generative AI on return on investment. How do you know if this is generating a return on investment? And my rebuttal would often be, well, what about the last piece of software you rolled out? How did you quantify your return on investment? And so you have to determine for the space where you're planning to land your solution, what matters. It may be a dollar figure for return on investment. It may be moving your net promoter score. It may be decreasing turnaround time. It may be reducing attrition among your workforce. All of your programs are prioritized against the business's metrics. It's never my own metrics. I would love for it to be based off of the vibes that we feel because we think we're doing something that's meaningful to humanity. But it's really based off of our customers and what they tell us matters the most to them.
It's a great way to frame it. So, okay, now I, of course, like you, love to experiment and explore. Haven't built my right hand yet, or right arm, because you have the full apparatus going. Of course, I loved the sharing of the geospatial stuff too, because I found myself wanting to like move that little car thingy myself. I just love it. So I took some time to play around with OpenAI Health. I received that lovely notice last week saying, congratulations, you have been activated or selected to actually finally have access. So I decided, let's explore this. Let's put it out there. Let's start uploading some things. So I went to a couple providers. I connected and did all that good stuff. So now that we have those kinds of technologies and we've had them for a while, what do you think some of the changes that may be needed for healthcare organizations and others to actually be prepared for that? Because there's pros as a consumer, but also consumers can be misled.
Absolutely. This is, if you ever want to go into a very interesting rabbit hole, join the clinical communities on things like Reddit and watch what they talk about and watch what concerns them. And so increasingly, just like in the early days of the internet, people are coming in with, here's my diagnosis, here's the medication I need, here's the procedure I think I'm eligible for. They're doing their research, but they're doing it on such a scale that they're processing hundreds of papers of scholarly articles that may be relevant to their condition. I think it means that both sides need to show up adequately prepared. And I think that this is an opportunity for health literacy that is actually a great playing field for consumers. Previously, we worked in a very paternalistic style of medicine. Everyone felt what the healthcare community says for me is what I will abide by. But there's also been this incredible erosion of belief in experts over the last few years. It kind of correlates with influencer or creator culture, this idea that anyone who can get mind share in social media tends to then carry significant influence, whereas before our authority figures were those who had higher education, certifications, credentials.
Yeah.
That's a little bit going away. So what does it mean? It means that both sides need to show up prepared. It means that imagine now that everything that you say as a clinician is going to be compared against the cutting edge, the latest research and all evidence and studies that are out there. So it also means that we need to amplify the tooling that we offer to our clinicians. And we also need to acknowledge that over the last few decades, there's also been a dispersion of subject matter expertise, that you have a care team. You don't just have one primary care physician. You can't reasonably expect one human being to address all of the different facets of someone's care. So you bring in the nutritionist, you bring in the social worker, you bring in the specialist, and they work together. And I think that's where the technology right now, it can give you those perspectives, it can role play those, but having that healthy dialogue around the experience that your patient member or consumer is having, I think is a very unique opportunity. So I'd love to see if we feel like every consumer is now convening their panel of experts, how can we do the same inside of our health systems, inside of our health plans, to make sure that people's needs are being met? How can we learn from the things that they may be asking from their clinical systems or from their non-clinical / consumer systems, and then try and meet those unmet needs? I think a lot of people are preparing for appointments with their AI. How can our own service providers allow us to do the same? Because they have a longitudinal record. We shouldn't have to connect everything to it, but sometimes we do. But ahead of that, it would be great if we could convey a request, have it scrub relevant information, or ask for information that the system might not have. Because one of the things that you see when you go to the consumer tools is they're going to connect to the radiology practice down the street, the big health system, that urgent care that you once went to that your PCP probably doesn't even know about. So how can we also have our own existing clinical systems of record become self-aware enough to know where the gaps are and say, hey, we didn't see you for 2 years, but now you're in for a well care visit, or maybe you're in because you have bronchitis. Let's catch up real quick. Can you tell me what's been going on? Has anything changed? Have you had any bouts of illness that we haven't discussed? Has your everyday life changed? So I think it's also about having more conversational preparation ahead of visits as well as after visits.
It's a great frame. So I'm going to give a scenario. I was at a friend's house yesterday. And we were talking about, of course, AI. And I mentioned, how OpenAI has the access, and I like exploring. I love the technology, and so they said, one of my friends went to urgent care. And they were very disappointed with the experience because when you go to see your provider, or like you pointed out, a clinician who's supposed to be the expert, right? And so here's the person that they're seeing for their appointment, typing some things in the computer. They turn around and they say, well, I think you have norovirus because it says right here that that's what you have. So it is kind of a whole system that has to change around how we use it, right? So the clinicians that are using it to support perhaps expediting clinical decision making also have to learn how to incorporate that alongside their own clinical skill set, because I would think over time that actually would erode the concept of expert even faster. Because if I'm the person sitting on that chair and I know someone's looking at it, I'm like, what do I need you for? I can do this myself. You froze. You may need to come back in, Corinne.
Okay, hold on.
There you go.
Am I back?
There you go.
Okay,
You literally froze on cue, I might tell you. Went, oh.
that was amazing. Okay, I'm glad you bring this up because I think there's a callback here. Remember earlier, we talked about this idea of that rote experience, about having been in the trenches and done the thing and seen the way things succeed and the way things fail. I think that is a very important element of the clinician here that is undervalued, that they have seen different cases, they've seen the same person over a period of time, that they know and have much better insight into when the AI doesn't have enough information or the right information to make a decision. I recently was frustrated by an experience where I had to make a choice between option A and option B. And so I started feeding information into my favorite AI and started getting back, yes, you should do A. And then I would rebut the point as part of a natural conversation, and it would flip and it would go to B. And then I would say something else and it would go back to A. And I eventually got tired of this and I said, I'm struggling with the fact that it feels like every time we're going back and forth, you're changing your mind. And the response I got was very insightful, actually. And it said, you're providing additional context that helps me in my decision-making process that you didn't provide at the start of the conversation. Mm-hmm. And I think that also goes back to what is the discretion and judgment of the clinician at making decisions and knowing what information is relevant. You or I, we're going to dump in whatever we can. Mm-hmm. We might mention symptoms that are unrelated. We might completely leave something out that is necessary as part of that diagnostic evaluation. And we have no idea. But a clinician has specifically and meaningfully been trained in this process. And so I think that that's going to be hard to replicate. I will say, I mean, I love its ability to support clinicians at doing research and helping. And so if I see my physician using the computer, I'm actually relieved that it's not just what's in their brain that they're relying on, that they may be looking at syndromic surveillance data and what's happening in the community. They have this connection to other physicians in their system and in their geography that allow them to understand way more than you or I would see, because we're not checking wastewater data, we're not checking emergency room drivers. They've got more information than we have, and we wouldn't think to put that in if we're just asking AI about our symptoms, right?
Yeah, yeah. So it almost seems that as we look to having a new way of working, like a new partnership, if you will, because I like you kind of view my favorite AI as a partner. It's a thought kind of helper and such. And sometimes, it does go down a certain path. And then when you give it more information, it's like, oh, and then it actually even corrected me last night when I had said something to it about a diagnosis, and I copied the document that was from one of my providers, and they're like, you do not have this. You said you had this at the beginning, but your doctor said it was normal. So
Yep.
then it's like, all right, let's correct, Lori. So I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, oh, I'm like that. This is enlightening because in my head, I started picking out words from a
Right.
report, and in that sense, it was a positive reinforcement to say, no, no, time out, Lori, right?
It it reminds me very much of our earlier days in school where we were taught to do things by hand.
Mm,
And, we always used to joke that our teachers would tell us, you're never going to have a calculator at all times. And we do. I've got one on
yeah,
my watch, I've got one on my
yeah,
phone. I don't think there's a day, I think I could run calculations on my microwave. But it also gave me this understanding of how the processes work and where it can be wrong. And I think that that's a level of training that we now need to instill in a lot of consumers and in a lot of experts, because there are experts who believe then that the art and the way that they practice their craft could never be replicated by the technology, which is fine. But it also means that they know how to correct and guide and use the technology in a superior way, in my opinion, because they know where it's likely to make the mistakes. It's an interesting challenge that we're up against right now. I've been tracking how educators handle this, and it's not unlike the way informatics was first taught to clinicians as well, because you don't go to med school thinking I need to learn how to code this in ICD-10 compliant with V24 of Medicare's risk adjustment methodology.
yeah.
Why, right? And so we do want people to understand the essentials as well as understand when and how could it be wrong, where will it make mistakes, what is my accountability, and when should I be a skeptical consumer. There's
Mhm.
been great education made for this, and I know I'm doing my job right when one of my children will correct me on something or point something out and say, I think that's AI, because they already have a certain dose of skepticism, which makes me feel really good because they want to check the math. They
Mhm.
want to make sure that everything looks the way that it should if you do it the manual way. I think that
Mhm.
also prepares us better for those failures. We've recently been talking a lot about this idea of kill switches. There's legislation that's been discussed around what it means to shut down an AI. This happened also when we started rolling out electronic medical records.
Mhm.
You had to be prepared to fall back on paper. And with increasing ransomware, that actually does happen pretty regularly. So you can't depend exclusively on the technology either. So I think what we're seeing again is still its reiteration of lessons learned in prior waves of technology. Just I think that it's happening a lot faster.
Mhm. So I'm going to move to an interesting topic about like workforce and change management when it
Yeah.
comes to all this. And I'm going to quote you on something
Excellent.
because I think that this is a really important topic. And I know it's something that resonates with you because I actually said, oh my gosh, like this is something that I think is a really important piece of all the work we're doing. So I'm going to quote you. I'm spending less time worrying about whether people can create solutions and more time thinking about stewardship, accountability, and the outcomes. Expand on that a little bit and some of the concerns that you have, because in the context of that discussion that you shared, it is like you can build anything. You can
Yeah.
do anything,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Anything. And you can do it in minutes. And a lot of people brag about it. Oh, I'm laying in bed, and before I even get out to have my morning coffee, I've built an app.
Yes. Ah, I've done it. I've sat on a park bench watching my children at the playground and built an app. Okay. So what you're getting at is really important. And it's the stuff that your technology teams and departments have been doing all along. And now it may feel like a bottleneck, but it is such an important, like we call it application lifecycle management. it is this idea that when you build an application, yes, you have to do all your due diligence and AI will write your test cases and your documentation for you. That's fine. But you need to test your users. You need to update roles, role definitions, responsibilities. You need to determine at higher levels of skill, should this operate differently? How do we know what is a mistake versus expert usage in an application? And then most notably, I think a lot of people don't realize the amount of governance that happens around applications often make data. And we are in a world where now everyone is making new data. So what is trustworthy and reliable? If I create an app that it kind of becomes my case management tool, what about the case management tool that my colleague created to help make his or her job more efficient? What about the one that this other team was using because they do acute transitions of care, but we do chronic condition management? Maybe we have different tools, but we're replicating some of the same steps and we're doing it in ways that might cause friction in the way we represent the data. So that's doing this extra work of governance to make sure that we're writing back into shared places that then other people are using. I often tell this anecdote. We were looking at different vendors that could help us with lightweight or low code app build out. And the vendor said, hey, I have this calculator I made to estimate what your costs would be in year one. And I thought, great, that's exactly what we need. That will help us with our budgeting. And he failed to find the
Froze. Wait
micro
just a sec.
apps to the
Yeah.
point where it was impossible to find what they needed, right? That's a governance problem. You need to start thinking about tagging, training, onboarding your staff, making sure that the tools that they need are discoverable. So when you build that app, you don't realize that now you're responsible for maintaining it through its life cycle. If someone reports a bug, whose problem is it to solve that bug? If it stops working during business hours and they need to fall back on paper, who's getting the call? And I think you mentioned this, who's getting called in the middle of the night? And why is that their responsibility? The biggest fear I have is that people are building things that they don't understand, so that if and when it fails or needs maintenance and troubleshooting, they're not going to be able to take care of that. And so I've been talking a lot with people in the product community about what it means as a steward of good technology to sometimes inherit the work that someone else may have originated, because you don't want to stop them and say, no, you need a bunch of tech people to support you through your build out. No, you need a bunch of tech people to provide playbooks and templates and guidelines, who then might say, okay, I love where you've taken this. We can take the maintenance from here. And if you need a major version change, we will let you provide the requirements for it and we will maintain it for you. And I think it's a really interesting shift in relationships in enterprises, as well as within product organizations as well, because you want to build things that are no longer, oh, we have to charge you a lot of money to customize this. You want it to be made configurable to support the needs of that particular user or team.
And you bring up a great point, because I think in the same, article, you talked about who owns it, right? So you build it, who owns it? So that's one thing. And we can get to that in a moment. And then you also talk about people who are building things who have no experience on scalable solutions and what it requires to actually operate them 24/7, right? All the different pieces that go into providing support to that living, breathing being of technology and applications, right? Because you don't just build it and go, oh yeah, it requires so much on the other end to keep it stable, to keep it functioning. So I'm curious to hear, some thoughts about that, because who owns it is, also, I think, one of the things that you, like I said, have talked about. But what about all the people that are building things that really don't have the experience to actually?
Yep, absolutely. This, I think we talked about people, process, and technology. What a moment of education we're living in right now. I actually think that this is a great way to upskill the workforce. I think that a lot of people are used to doing the thing. These are the papers in front of me. I'll do the thing. I'll pass it on. I think there's a famous idea of the Turing test where if you put information in one language into a box and the person inside of the box has a rule set that tells them, if you see this, then I need you to do that. And then they move it outside and they can translate a language without really understanding the language. We're trying to take people from just having the guide to understanding that the box exists at all. That was a little bit nebulous. So it's this idea that we want to train people to see these patterns. We want to train people to be good stewards of application lifecycle. We want them to understand how software and systems get scoped and designed. We want them to understand what that looks like. So we want to bring them along in the journey. I think it's really important that we not think that this is suddenly some niche skill. I will say, as I mentioned earlier, without those learnings, the gotchas, this is how this could fall apart, people won't be as successful. And so I have been really vocal about making sure people get educated on this. I think this is the next marketable skill. If everyone now can kind of understand the AI and work with the AI, I want them to also build their apps. And I encourage people in their spare time to build those apps at home and then to use it and realize, oh, it didn't work the way that I wanted to because I only put a couple sentences into an AI tool to create it. So I created one for my family. It's a visual timer. And what I found is I worked through it over a couple of weeks, and there were lots of things I wanted to change. Things that if I had genuinely sat down and written it out like a full functional and requirement spec, I would have gotten, but then I didn't. I just needed the tool at the time. And so how do you teach someone that? The best way is through practice and projects. And I think people do best when it's practice and projects about the work they're already doing, because it allows them to reflect on those patterns. And then it has to be a dialogue. It has to be that you sit with them and you talk with them about, well, when things are broken in your work, how do you know? And what do you do? How would you recover from that? And you kind of talk them through that thought process. In terms of how then you decide ownership, this usually happens on a sliding scale, and every organization needs to decide what axes matter to them. Just like deciding what is considered risky AI depends very much on the enterprise at hand. I tend to look for impact. How many people would be upset or fall back to paper if this application broke? If it's only my direct team, a little bit lower risk. If it's an entire department or people that I don't even know directly, now we're talking about maybe taking this and having someone else maintain it for me, someone whose job is the maintenance and monitoring and the troubleshooting. And then another is, well, what is the enormity of the thing that it is doing? So if it's just me, but it has consequential impact on something or someone, I need oversight too. And I often think about this through the lens of, if I left my workplace, would it be okay if the tool disappeared? If the answer is yes, that's great. It was just an individual productivity tool. But if the answer is, oh, things would fall apart, now it is bigger than just me as an individual, and I need to transfer that responsibility and knowledge to someone else so that it does not fall apart without me. And that is what we used to call shadow IT. It's the tools that we all built to survive that then become so cryptic and so misunderstood that once a year process that only one person knows falls apart because that person is on their honeymoon or has left the company. Yeah. And those things, those scare me, and those predate AI, right? Yeah. And we've always had that problem, but I think now we can be more forthcoming about identifying it.
Yeah. What are the most common mistakes that you see organizations make when they are looking at adopting AI?
I think going all or nothing and rolling out through a broad swath of your employees. I think that it's well-intentioned, but often creates chaos. I think going with a diverse but smaller group is a good way to start. And then understanding that you'll learn lessons that if you had started with one team or one department, you wouldn't have caught. You also don't want to just react to your super users, the people who are using AI in their personal lives and are very savvy and plugged in, because they don't represent the average employee. And you also need to know what the average employee is in your enterprise, because it may be that you work in a very risk-averse organization that maybe hasn't made big adoption, and you will need to change your engagement and outreach methodologies appropriately. You also want to determine what energy you're bringing. I bring a very educational, grassroots type mindset. I don't want people to feel like AI and technology are being shoved at me, and if I don't adapt, that's it for me. No, it should be very much one of, hey, I found this awesome way that I can do my job in a way that brings me more joy, that makes me feel more complicit in everyone else's success, and it feels like I'm learning something too. That is a mindset that I have brought to any AI program that I engage with, no matter the employer. I love doing little micro learnings, education sessions. There was even one whole week that we did at a prior workplace where we called it camp. And just like in camp, you might have arts and crafts, you might have navigating using a map. Everyone brought that one thing that they were really good at, and they trained their peers. And I think AI is such a great example of that, where sometimes the things that people are doing may not even be related to the workplace, but they have clear adaptations. So if someone built a really killer itinerary builder for their trip to one country, you may ask yourself, how else do we do complex plan design, and what can we learn from that project to bring into our workplace? So I encourage that level of experimentation. I think it's rather safe, and it also introduces people from across the organization to each other.
So all the experience you have in, thinking about governing this beautiful work and all the excitement that goes along with it, there's a lot of things to manage and oversee. So are there any governance kind of tips or methods that you have found really do prove to be like the best, things that you found that really do work?
Okay. The key is first creating a trusted relationship. You do not want your partners to feel like AI governance is a burden or a gate or an obstacle, because the moment that you introduce that sort of mindset, you will be intentionally kept in the dark. That's just the way it is. If people feel like engaging an AI governance team is going to slow things down, they will try to avoid it until the last possible minute. I think it's called the 1-10-100 mindset, which is used in physical aerospace style engineering. If you find the problem in the specification, it costs you $1. If you find it during testing, you spend $10. But if you find it after it's in the real world, you're spending $100 to fix it. AI governance needs to start with that spirit of trust so that you find the dollar problems and you're not trying to correct the $100 mistakes. So I very much think of AI governance as being an enablement function. To do it well is to be that resource that comes with all of the playbooks and the templates and the guides that says, okay, there are facets of risk in any AI project. There's workforce and employee risk, which is a privacy concern or an HR concern. You have compliance and regulatory risk. You might have data exposure risk or protected health information or security. Let's create a bunch of materials that help to understand how you identify and mitigate those risks. Here are our recommended controls. Here's a playbook that will make this so much easier for you. Oh, you're about to enter another stage of your program's lifecycle. You're about to go to testing. Let me give you some materials on best practices in testing. And there's plenty out there. The NIST AI Risk Management Framework supplies some, the Coalition for Health AI, the Health AI Partnership, and they range from how to pick the right vendor, how to pick the right use case, how to evaluate ambient AI, how to evaluate mental health AI. You don't have to worry about defining all of the guardrails, because your AI governance program should inherit what is best in industry right now and what is standards driven and becoming adopted, and they can help you conform to that. That's my strong suggestion about how to be effective at starting your AI governance program.
Yeah, and to your point, you want people to kind of bring things forward. You want that partnership because to have something being built behind the scenes, and then, if there's, something, that happens as a result of that, if it actually gets into use and people are using it to do work, and there's an event or an adverse outcome, and it's like that's the thing that would just be heartbreaking to see happen, right?
We want to poke at all the soft spots and try and
Yeah.
reinforce them as early as possible. That's the
Yeah.
goal.
So you brought up an interesting, I think, point because there's people like you and I. You're definitely far more advanced when it comes to building and things that we both, I think, share a passion and love for technology, and are expressing our art in different ways. I like building software, and in the midst of kind of modernizing one. Um, People have different levels of literacy. There's different ages, right? And designing AI is not a one size fits all. And so when you think about designing for people based on like the age group served, what do most people developing AI get wrong? And I, want to say, is you posted a really cool thing on your site that I wish that I was in Seattle this week to be there. I would love to go to the senior center and be
Yes.
right there with them. Like I would get on a plane right now, Corinne, and I would go up to Seattle just to have that opportunity to sit and hear from the people, in that center.
Yes.
So share a little bit more about like what do people, get wrong when they're building products for
Okay.
like different people?
Yes. You are getting into some really interesting human factors and human computer interaction questions. And I think you used a phrase that I want to correct, which is it's not one size fits all. Totally agree with that because that assumes one size. You ever get a one size fits all sweater or scarf and you're like, this is not made for real people? Yeah. So I like to think of it as adjustable. And when it gives me shivers because when I first started working with the technology, that was what stood out to me. How reactive it was. You could spell words wrong. You could write an incomplete sentence, a half thought, and it would try and understand you. And I want you to think back to the early days of the way we might talk to an assistant on our phone, a device in our home. You had to code switch. You had to change the way that you spoke so that the technology could understand your request. That is not the way that today's technology is working, but we've got a lot of trust to regain that we burned the first time around. Even my children have been trained to know that if I am trying to address a device that's on the other side of the room, they have to stop talking. Mom said the secret code word, and now the device is listening. And if I talk, it's going to think that I'm giving the command. And that just shows you where we've gone wrong, right? When we've had to change our behaviors in a way that I feel is very undesirable. So I would first ask, how can the technology adapt to
Mhm.
our needs? And an early first round, it used to be that you would have to get a panel of test users, you would have to recruit candidates, you would have to study their interactions. We would oftentimes test on each other, which isn't great because we're not truly representative of the customer. But it is easier than ever to build prototypes, and
Mhm.
it's easier than ever to simulate users. Now, user simulation is not the only way that you should do this, but I love to write something, build something, and then ask an I want you to adopt this persona.
Mhm.
Um, Maybe you're slower to react. Maybe you don't catch all of the words that are said to you. I want you to simulate cognitive decline. I want you to simulate age-related visual degradation.
Mhm.
Now I want you to look at my application and I want you to tell me what might need to change and what might be working well. Those are things that you were going to experiment with people on. And I would also think about whether the setting needs to be all or nothing. I have often encouraged every developer that I meet to consider a toggle or a slider or something that allows the end user to say, these are my needs, and you can adapt to them. So if I want a highly technical, in-depth explanation of everything, let's go. If you want keep it very simple and then give me the chance to drill deeper where I need to, let's build that. And I often think about something like today's explanation of benefits that you get in the mail.
Yeah.
I don't understand them. But what if when it got to you, you were given the choice that you could go a little simpler, you could go a little more complex, you could dig into each word on that paper, you could translate it into the language or the literacy level that is appropriate to you, all in real time. We actually have the technology to do that. And so I think we are moving more towards, you'll hear the phrase natural user interface, and that can be a physical thing. It can be a voice activated assistant, it can be a touch related screen, but it can also be ensuring that the interface that you create is meeting the person where they are. And I think people need to rethink what that expectation should be. Because when you first ask AI to build something for you, it right now it's a novice designer. It's going to create pretty similar designs over and over again. But the more you tell it who you're targeting and the more you run simulations of your target user, the more you'll refine it to land where it's actually supposed to land. A consumer sitting at home using their mobile device is going to interact very differently than a clinician who may be set up on 2 monitors, but they're on a touchdown space that they don't regularly use in a hospital.
I am sure that you encounter all kinds of people coming to you trying to sell you product.
Yeah.
Trying to sell you the next best thing. So what is the single most, like the biggest mistake that people make during these kind of sales process pitches to you?
It's a great question. I think lately there's been a shift around solution-based thinking into problem or need-based solution design, meaning, especially in the industry of healthcare, we feel like we have all of our problems figured out. Risk adjustment, quality measures, patient activation, patient engagement, clinician burnout, revenue cycle, you got it. There's a list. And so I can almost assume during the first meeting, the pitch, that I know where they're going. And the worst too is sometimes they spend so much time setting up that I'm like, I could have vibe coded that app in the background. I think one of the things that now gets me excited is when they're giving me the materials and the information that I know will be needed for things like governance, procurement, security reviews early on. Because the worst thing is, especially now that it's easier to build, seeing something come through that has tremendous merit, we understand that it is based off of a need that it is addressing. It is not simply a solution to be sold. It was the right time, the right solution. But then it will fall apart because you find out that they don't do basic phishing attempts against their staff, that they don't do mandatory HIPAA training every year. We need to know that this has been vetted, curated, and is trustworthy. It's almost like you're back in the early days of software as a medical device, there was a trial around a culture of quality and safety. If I believe that the vendor, the contractor, that entity has a culture of quality and safety, at the end of the day, it may even be immaterial what solution they are planning to sell me because I trust that they will do it the right way. And that matters way more now than it did 5-10 years ago.
So speaking of 5 years, let's go 5 years forward. What do you think AI is going to look like in 5 years from now when you think about just going beyond like efficiency metrics and a lot of the things that people are doing? If you had to put on your kind of future vision glasses in 5 years from now, if I'm looking at your LinkedIn, what's the message going to be?
Okay, Lori, there's 2 ways that this can go, and any science fiction nerd knows that it can be dystopian and it can be utopian, and that I will say, I think dystopian sells. So I'll put that aside for now. However, there's a word that I use, and it is a word that I heard a lot even 10 years ago, and it went quiet. And it's not abundance, which is what big tech says. It's abundance. No, it's not abundance. It's ubiquity. Ubiquity means something is caring for you. I'm looking at this through a healthcare lens, but there's lots of other ways we can take this. Something is caring for you and worrying about your needs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It is relentless. It is concerned. It is proactive. It is empathetic. And there is something so beautiful because that is how we all want to be cared for. It is why many of us entered healthcare. It is why many of us even entered technology. We felt the thing that we needed wasn't there when we needed it, or it didn't meet our expectations. Ubiquity means that it understands you, but ubiquity also, I believe that a large movement is already underway towards physical AI. This is why I play with robots. My job is to be a little bit ahead of what's next. So more recently, I was working with voice AI. Voice AI is awesome. I think we're starting to tap out. I don't know if you've seen the latest releases. You can talk over each other. It's called duplex mode. With physical AI, we are talking about things that can thrive in the real world. And they're learning the way that the language models did, just as they adapted to vision, just as they adapted to video and voice. I think that our world may become peppered with lots of physical AI. So this is robots. This may not be robots in the, it's a humanoid that looks like us and delivers packages, but it could be doing little things around your home. And I think the implications to healthcare are profound when the goal of many individuals is to remain independent.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think that there's a million things a day that I wish I had a robot or a technology to help me with. The things that are on the floor that are a tripping hazard or a
Mm,
choking hazard, the
hmm.
things that could harm me in my home, that something will come and point out and address proactively. So I think that's our 5 year runway. I've already seen some pretty wild visions about what even vehicles might look like when they are driving themselves. What happens to the time that we're spending inside of our vehicles? We're captive. And that's a really interesting opportunity for things like learning and health and engagement and social. I think there's a lot of changes that we're likely to see that are out in the real world, whereas it felt like the last few years of technology were about getting us to obsess about our screens and sit with our phones and our computers. But even now, we've already seen a divorce that the things that you're doing on your computer, great, we're going to run that in the cloud. Take your phone with you, go to the playground and hang out with your kids. The
Yeah.
AI is working on this task for you. So that's definitely my 5 year vision.
Nice. I just had a vision of a new concept of aging in place, right? Because just think about the possibility of, following along what you had shared, of having something in your home that physical AI, right? That tool to like help you, with picking things up or gathering things or like
Yes,
activities of daily living. I mean, just
yes.
think about that. And,
I
so by the time I'm ready for that, Corinne, you and I will still be tapping away on LinkedIn and I'll be the
absolutely.
tester.
It's
I'll
coming
age.
faster than you think, my friend. And I would say we're already at the point where the average cost of a home robot is less than a hospitalization. And I don't think people realize how important that tipping point truly is. And I think we also underestimate how much we would be willing to spend to get time back with each other.
Yeah.
The time that I'm supposed to be with my kids between work and bedtime, I'm furiously trying to clean the kitchen, put away the dishes, prepare dinner, pack lunches for tomorrow, make sure all the clothes get to the wash, run the washer. Oh, did I get the mail? All of these things. What if some of them were already taken care of? Where would we repurpose that time but with each other?
Yeah. Well, and speaking of, we are at 6 o'clock on the
Ooh,
nose, and I would love to thank you and also your family for sharing us with you.
thank you, Lori.
And, let them know that we really appreciate this time, your learning, your wisdom. And I will look forward to the next LinkedIn post and
Yes,
learning about your beautiful tool and going on the journey as you build your robot. One of many, because I can imagine you're going to
absolutely.
do the left hand at some point or
Absolutely.
something. You'll do
Oh, there's
something. Yeah.
Yes. There's a Ricci, which is a little head, and it's so cute. And you can bop it, and it's got a built-in camera, and people are combining the head and the limbs. It's happening, Lori. It's definitely going to happen.
I can't wait. We'll have a beautiful evening,
Thank
and I
you.
will look forward to talking to you again if I'm ever in Seattle. I definitely want to come visit. We can sit on the park bench and we can code together.
I would love that. Thank you, Lori.
Right. Good
Take
night.
care. Bye.